Well, we were talking here earlier, and what will I talk about? I have been given a limit, which I probably will not oblige, but I was coming over here today, and I got to thinking, this is not, Jatan might remember this, and some others, but I did this once before. But it seemed to me like the podium was there. Was it ever there? Okay, that's right. The room seemed so much smaller then. And I was just thinking who was here. Jim, did I see you? Jim Townsend? He's not here. Jim was here. Bill Newman. Jatan, of course. And I was just, Larry Whitaker from McLean County, who's passed. And I don't know whether Larry Joe was here or not. I bet he was, but I can't remember that. Earl Russell. And I was just thinking of all the people who were here then and how things have changed and how we've all changed. And myself, I've changed. I'm growing up. I'm getting shorter, smaller. I was about 5'8" then. And I'm 5'6" now. I'm growing up. I thank the good Lord to call me home before I get under 5 foot, though. I do. I believe so. These pants I'm wearing now, when I bought them, were walking shorts. So I am growing up. And I'm sagging. I'm worried about the sag factor now, and I'm sagging, as many of us are. And so I got to thinking about, things have changed in my household, too. Christmas, I didn't get much at Christmas. Sarah was there. She knows that. I got a new hat. Jane, my wife, saw where you lose 80% of your body heat through your head, and she didn't give me any clothes. She said, Bob, you don't need to wear any clothes anymore. She just gave me a good hat. So I just wear a hat now, and I don't wear clothes. But at any rate, so things have changed now, and I've gotten to the point where I go to the Y. We had a nice program at the Y yesterday. Y'all work out, any of y'all? Some of them, Sarah does, I know, because we had to keep the kids late last night because she theoretically went to Zumba. I don't see any results. She seems to be tired, but it's more of a headache, I noticed, than exercise today. But anyway, I go to the Y. I came in the other day. Y'all will understand this about getting old. But I came in the other day and I got to pumping around. I've been exercising. I looked at Jane. I said, Jane, look at me. Boxers or jockeys? What do you think? She said, depends. So I do catch on with all that. And I got to thinking how things have changed. And as Bill said, I did write a book. And, I got to thinking, why do you do that? Why'd you do that? And I don't write very well, but I just enjoy it. And I told Jane one time, I said, Jane, I think I've got a book in me. She said, I knew you were full of something, but I didn't know it was a book. And so we do understand that, but I think what it was, what caused me to do this is, I value those old days, the good old days. But, they weren't all that good. Some of you remember it. Some of you remember. We like to romanticize them like we romanticize the Old West, but they weren't all that good. How many of y'all have taken a bath in a wash tub, with water that was set out in the sun, warmed up? And the kids took the baths in order. I was the fifth of 5 kids. So by the time I got to take a bath, it was pretty soap in, pretty dirty. Scummy, and had a few flies drifting around on the top of it too, if you remember. So it wasn't good. So you didn't. Those were the good old days. And the next day we'd go to church with Mom and Dad, and I was the youngest, and I sat in the middle of the front seat. And now let me ask you, how many of you have experienced this? I'd sit there, and Mom said, "Bob, your ears are dirty," and she'd pull out that handkerchief. It smelled like lilac, and she'd dampen it and start scrubbing your ear. We called it a spit bath. How many of y'all have had spit baths? Don't be ashamed. Raise your hand. See, many of you had. Robert, you haven't. Have you really? But see, at any rate, so I got to thinking, there's the good old days. So what was so good about them? And so I tell you, I think that we were just talking out in the hall a few minutes ago about the people most of you deal with. And you know, it's the staff back there essentially, is that right? Essentially the staff. Y'all deal with a segment of the people that are in need in many cases. Life's not always been good too. And then you look up here at you, and you deal with that segment, but you also deal with everybody. And so where do they come together? Where do they meet? And so I got to thinking about the days that I loved, and so I talked to my wife one time many, many years ago, and she said, you know, if you don't write these stories down, they'll be lost, they'll be forgotten. So I wrote them down. And it resulted over the years in the radio program, as Bill mentioned, and it resulted in a book. This book, as he mentioned, is for sale. But it's Tall Tales, and somebody asked me, I don't know, somebody, maybe it's somebody 10 years ago, I don't know, but are all those stories true? And they're not, but they all could be. One of y'all asked me, did you? And they're not, and all the people real? No, they're not, but they all could be. And that's the reality of the thing. It's people we have dealt with and we deal with every day. So what I have tried to do is try to preserve an ethic of people who had a hard life, the good old days. But you know, I've got a chapter in there called Couples, Taffy Couples. And you know, it was an example. I think the lead sentence was, a divorce lawyer would have gone broke in Taffy, Kentucky. Because when a Taffy couple said, I do, they meant it. You know, they just didn't turn tail and run at every kind of step of misfortune. And so I really enjoyed writing about those people who were able, as I got to thinking, that able to kind of look misfortune in the eye and spit it in the face. Even though I have to take a bath in a wash tub, I'll make the very best that I can, and I'll get as clean as I can. So what I have tried to do is write the story of some of those people, of course. It's no great tome. It's not, don't look for Ernest Hemingway. It's not that kind of intent. But I like to write about the front porch. Front porch. I remember we had a swing on our front porch, and my sister Ray, who still lives in Hartford, where's Charlotte? Charlotte, here. You know my sister Ray. She and I used to sit on the front porch and sing to her real loud. Somebody told her one time she could sing like Minnie Pearl, and she thought it was a compliment. So Minnie Pearl, you know, she was on the Grand Ole Opry for so many years. She told this story one time, and I told her and got criticized for it. They said this woman was going in front of the Catholic Church and saw a priest and said, "Beg your pardon, Father, but is Mass out?" He said, "No, ma'am, but your hat's on a little crooked." She got by with that, and I couldn't get by with it. But she sang like Minnie Pearl, and it was real loud. And somebody said, "You going to worry the neighbors? You're going to interrupt the neighbors." And Dad says, "Shoot," said, "we live so far from our nearest neighbor, we had to have our own tomcat." So we didn't bother anybody with our neighbors on the front porch. And the Taffy couples, I like to write about them because they made a commitment. Bum and Maybelline lived there. Y'all have heard me talk about it. They had 13 kids. See, they were going to quit after 12. And but unfortunately, Maybelline got pregnant again, and they had the 13th one. And Bum wanted to have another one. He said 13 is an unusually odd number, and we don't need to stop on 13. We need to have one more. But I like to tell that Maybelline put her foot and her gown down at the same time. No more kids. No more kids for us. So they had... they met like in the first or second grade, and they just sing the march. And they lived through 13 kids. And As far as I know, Maybelline never looked for anybody else, and Bum never dared to. So it was just that kind of relationship that they had, and they weren't affluent, but they were happy with 13 kids. Marshall. I don't want to slip over to catch me, Kim. She told me I had 15 minutes. So you throw something at me. Well, they'll tell me when to stop. When y'all quit giggling, y'all, I know. I haven't heard any guffaws, but I've heard some giggles. So, Marshall, he was the town marshal. Of course, nobody else would take the job over there. He applied for the job, and he came home and he told his wife, Ruby May, said, I think I got the job. And she said, well, what happened? He said, well, they asked me some questions like who was buried in Grant's tomb, and I knew that. And he said, who was the first president of the United States? I knew that, George Washington. And they asked me who assassinated President Lincoln, so I know I got the job. They already gave me my first murder case. So he knew Marshall and Ruby May got married. Ruby May lived up at Edinburgh, and she was the prettiest girl in Edinburgh, and I won't go into all that. But they had a son. They had a son named Duty, and Duty is he was a boy of the streets there at Taffy. You know how y'all remember this? Those cold drink trucks that came down those old gravel roads with the grease on the oil on the road, and they had that chain hanging from the back. Y'all remember that? To ground it, keep it grounded. And they had the RC truck there one day, and Duty wanted an RC off the truck. The driver said, "I can't give you one. They're counted." He said, "I want an RC. I can't give you one, Duty. They're counted." So he said, I want an RC. Finally, he said, here, take this nickel, go buy an RC. A few minutes, he came out drinking a Pepsi-Cola. He said, here, you worry me to death to get an RC, and I give you a nickel. You go in and buy my competitor's drink. He said, dude, he sucked himself up, said, ain't nobody going to tell me how to spend my money. That's who they are. Marshall and Ruby May. Esther Lean married, she never did marry Cousin Otto. Cousin Otto, they had a problem, but you haven't missed anything. I'll go back over it. I want to hear it.
You'll do it after the meeting, Jack.
You can have some of these people who are dozing up here, man. Esther Lane, she was a businesswoman there in town. She was the exchange operator and the best gossip in town, and she was not a good exchange operator. Somebody called one time and says, long distance from California. She said, it sure is, and hung up. So she was not very good at that, but she was a good gossip. And Cousin Otto, he had a problem with drinking. He was gone a lot of times, and one time he left for a couple of years. He was going down in front of the store at Taffy and saw a sign that said, drink Canada dry, so he moved on up to Montreal. And he was gone for some time. But when he came back, they didn't get married. See, Esther Lean wouldn't marry him when he was drunk, and he wouldn't marry her when he was sober. So they just kind of cohabited, I guess you could call it now. But at any rate, Bum was down. Cousin Otto was down at the store at Taffy one day and said, had Esther Lee down on her knees last night. They said, how in the world did you do that? Said, she was down on her knees looking under the bed, said, get out from under there, you coward. But they had a great relationship. Couples with Taffy, Kentucky, who stayed together through thick and thin. And there were all kinds of stories about health. You know, patent medicine, y'all remember patent medicines, don't you? Raleigh Products and Watkins are big around Taffy. I don't want to run over here, so y'all, I know you got a big agenda, I'm serious, so y'all pardon me when I need to shut up. I'd go on a long time. You know, when a man hasn't got much to say, he can talk a lot. But patent medicines, how many of y'all have been to bed at night with big salve on a flannel rag, sock? Yeah, you wrapped around your neck. Let's see your hand. I just want to see if I'm talking. That's a pretty good number. Wake up in the morning, it's hanging down here, cold. Felt good for a while. How many of you have had it put on your feet? One.
Yeah, good for cold.
Why did they do that, you know?
Don't know what grandmother did that.
But she did it.
Yeah, good for
I never have.
Good for a cold.
It's good for, now how, yoga, putting it on your feet is good for a cold. It runs its way up, I guess. Big sag, just think of all that. How many of you had, castor oil? You know, that was big, asphyxia bags and all that kind of stuff. I had we built up a tolerance to that kind of stuff, I think, out in the country. For a lot of that stuff, I could eat a peck of green apples, I bet, and it wouldn't bother me. But I had a cousin up in Chicago. He could look at a green apple and get what we call the green apple quick step. Y'all know what I'm talking about? The green apple quick step. And he would, chiggers, I told him I think chiggers and fleas would wait for him just so they cross the bridge over here and they'd all jump on him in mass. But we survived those kinds of times, I think, with a persistence and an idea that that's the way life was. We had a guy that was a notary public. He got his notary license in Hartford, I think, and there was a little competition for notarizing in there. So he moved out to Taffy, and he's going to make his living notarizing as a notary public. Well, it didn't pan out real good, and so he started diversifying. He was going to do bronze baby shoes, and that didn't work out too great for him. So he just helped around there, but the thing that I wanted to point out in Taffy, see, it was a different life then. Notarizing business wasn't anything. All you had to do to seal a deal was shake the hand. And so they had nobody to deal with. So it was a kind of a different lifestyle. Churches, the center of the life. The Baptist church and the Methodist church in Taffy were small. So they, when the Methodist preacher resigned, they had little bitty congregations, so they decided to join together and make one congregation. And they decided that they would that they would just accommodate each other's beliefs. And so they decided that everybody got along so good, they just agreed on everything. When they came time for them to decide what to call it, they thought, well, we'll just name it the Church and we all get along, but they couldn't agree on that name, so they named it the Church of Choice. And they had the Baptists on one side and the Methodists on the other. You have to understand. And they accommodated that. See, the Baptists had to have a little extra room between the pews for people who had a sudden urge to get up and run up and down the aisle shouting. And the Methodist pews could be closer together because they'd never known the Methodists to shout. And so they had to provide some room for yelling and hollering and running. And in fact, the Baptist side was real noisy generally, with amens and, and thank the Lord and all this, and the Methodists, Well, one time, they did think they heard an amen coming from the Methodist side, but it turns out it was just a bum snoring. So they never did get a noise from that side. So they agreed that they could all get along, but they had issues. And one of them was, of course, baptizing. Baptists believe you got to be immersed, and Methodists believe a little bit of sprinkling on the head will do the trick. And so, well, in fact, Cousin Otto, he wanted to join one time, and they admitted him by a vote of 4-3. He got in, and his folks were all Methodists, so he wanted to be sprinkled, and the group wouldn't agree to that. They said his sins were so deep and so egregious that they had to anchor him out in deep water overnight to wash his sins away before he could come in. But they didn't. The Methodists got jealous because Preacher Newton was a Baptist minister, and then they took him as their pastor, both of Church of Choice, and so he was getting older, and they were having trouble. He didn't want to catch cold out in Rough River, so the Baptists they recommended that they buy him a wetsuit. Like what was that show? Where you wore a wetsuit and and he had you cap up over it. Some guy, it was years ago, and they bought him one like that, and it worked out well. But the flippers came with it, and he insisted on wearing them out into rough river. It became awkward, but he wore them anyway. And the Methodists got jealous of having to spend all that money on a wetsuit, so the Baptists did finally agree to buy Preacher Newton a pair of rubber gloves when he had to deal with the Methodist side. So things worked out pretty good. But this is what I was going to tell you about. My time's about up, but it's already passed. In fact, I know that. And but I'm going to tell you this real quickly about, Harv, they didn't have a baptistry. And things were not, even the wetsuit didn't work out. So they wanted to do some baptizing in their church, and they didn't. And Harv had a watering trough that he had used to dip sheep in, and he didn't have any more sheep. So he volunteered to let them use that to see if it would work out as a baptistry. And he did. They brought it in there. And Sister Bessie had been saved a couple of 3 weeks ago, and she wanted to be immersed. And so I'm not going to go into it too heavily, but it was one of the problems they had with baptizing Sister Bessie is the baptizing tub was 54 inches wide and her hips were 58. And when preacher tried to get her underneath the water, he was going to lay her over his right leg, and it slipped, and it caused her to flip over. And it caught Preacher Newton underneath her. And she was a non-swimmer, and she was trying to dog paddle out of that thing and yelling and hollering that she was dying. And every time Preacher Newton would come up for air, she'd hit him with an elbow and he'd go down again. And they were afraid that they were going to lose her. In fact, some people in the back had already started talking about finding a substitute for Preacher Newton in case they lost him. But I'm not going to go into it much further than that. Y'all get the idea. Well, I will tell you this. She wore this big white sheet-like thing over. It was kind of angelic looking, she thought. And she didn't, they wore feed sack dresses and, unfortunately, underwear a lot of times. Y'all remember None Better flour milling company here? Well, Sister Bessie, when she flipped over, got her sheet wet, and they could see some underwear she had made for herself through that sheet, and right across her buttocks it said None Better. I'm going to leave it there except to tell you that I thank you very much for inviting me. And I wanted to tell you, I do have this book. I will my picture's on the back. And I'm just going to say this about it. If you don't like the book, the picture alone probably would be worth it. I had a friend, he said he bought one and he put it out in the garden. He had rabbits bringing stuff back he stole 3 years ago. I'll tell you one other thing, Barry mentioned this to me. If you got somebody that you don't care much for, you feel an obligation to buy them a gift, but you don't want to get them much. My friend Barry, Robert and I got a real close friend named Barry. Some of y'all might know him, Barry Denton. I came back from Christmas one time years ago, and my mother-in-law lived at Hartford, and I said, Barry, let me show you this, what my mother-in-law gave me for Christmas. And I showed him my tie, and he looked at me so serious, and he said, Bobby, that woman hates you. so if you got somebody with you there, that's it right there. But I do want to tell you this. I know that you and your jobs meet all kinds of people. Meet all kinds. And we could debate that issue forever and ever and ever. Back in the days, my mother midwifed half of Bum and Maybelline's kids. It was uncommon to hear them yelling at night, Miss Park, can you come? Mama's about to have another baby. We kind of took care of our own, but as we talked back there, it's become bigger than us. And so that's where so much of what you do comes in. And it's where there's a time in our life where the good old days are not the good old days, but What they engendered, what they developed, what they created was an independent lifestyle that I'll look you in the eye and I will accept what happens, but I'll make myself better every day. So let me just say this. I'm 81 years old. I stand here before you today with knowing my positive contributions to most people's lives is over. But yours isn't. Yours isn't. And in a way, I'm sorry for you. But in another way, I think, what great opportunities you have. You don't even recognize it so many times. So let me just suggest this. Don't look for the big score. I'm not looking to sell 1,000 books over here. That's not my goal. Or even sell 1,000. But my goal is to take each day as I have, because I know I don't have that many left. Use it to the best I can, and take a small victory every chance I get, because every time you can leave somebody with a smile on their face and with their step a little bit lighter today, you've accomplished your purpose. Thank you very much.